Hi everyone, welcome back to another episode of Makeup and Wake Up. I am so happy that you guys have joined me for another episode. Thank you guys so much who have been keeping up with this series. It really means a lot to me. I noticed that these videos aren't getting as many views as my other videos, and I actually lose subscribers anytime I post them, but every comment that I get on these videos and all of the messages that you guys send me about these videos really keep me going. You guys saying that you learn so much, your messages telling me that these videos helped you explain to your families what's going on. It's so beautiful. It really does show me that these videos are important to keep doing, and it really does just drive my passion and motivation to keep going. So thank you guys so much. With that being said, the viewership on these videos is extremely low compared to my other videos. Even though I'm getting very beautiful and genuine comments and messages from these videos, it really does help when you guys like this video and comment on it, so I really do encourage you guys to do both of those things. Today's video focuses on environmental racism, and I want to make it clear, like in every other one of my makeup and wake up videos, this is a very surface level introduction to the topic of environmental racism. Environmental racism has been studied for decades. There is so much information about it, books, articles, documentaries, but it does kind of get pushed to the side along with a lot of other environmental issues. I did struggle a little bit with this video because I had concerns that the information that I was presenting wasn't touching on how horrific environmental racism is, because I am not personally affected by environmental racism. And by that I mean I don't have a power plant in my backyard. But when we think about it, environmental racism does affect every single person living on this earth, and we cannot talk about the environment without talking about racism. So like the other videos in this series, I want you guys to go through this video remembering that this is so surface level, this is just an introduction to the topic, and to absolutely watch videos and documentaries and read books and journals about this topic, because nothing is more powerful than listening to the voices who are directly impacted by what's going on. I will definitely leave some amazing videos that I watched down below that kind of helped me understand environmental racism a little bit more. Definitely check those out, because it really is so important to listen to the stories of people who are affected by this personally. So like I said earlier, it is true that we cannot talk about the environment without talking about racism. A lot of the topics that environmentalists care about, which is like air pollution and farming and coal, that all disproportionately affects people of color. And as we notice by now, people of color face racial injustice in literally every aspect of their life, including environmental concerns. Some of the biggest concerning industries in our country would have to be pig farming and landfills and fracking, pipelines, and toxic waste dumping. And who do you think lives by all of those industries? Obviously people of color, if you needed me to spell it out for you. And why do you think America allows that? Why do you think America allows these industries to live so closely to Black communities, Latin communities, Native communities? It's because of racism. White communities, privileged communities, do not want to live by those institutions, so they either get to move away from those areas, or they put a lot of money into the government to make sure that those institutions don't come into their communities. So let's talk about some history for a moment. Environmental racism was able to emerge to the spotlight because of the Memphis sanitation strike. So two men whose names were Eckel Cole and Robert Walter were two sanitation workers working in Memphis, Tennessee. And for sanitation workers, which at the time were mainly Black men, working conditions were really horrible. There was definitely a lack of proper equipment. The men didn't really get adequate uniform, and the working conditions overall were just really poor and super unsafe. So on this particular day in February of 1968, these two men worked as garbage men, and on this particular day it was raining, so the two men seek shelter in the back of their garbage truck. So like where the garbage was, sort of on the ledge, I suppose, they were sitting, because that kind of overhanging part on top of the truck was able to shield them from the rain. So they were just sitting back there, but because of improper equipment, like I was saying earlier, the truck malfunctioned, I think also having to do with it raining, and the truck crush them. The part that kind of crushes the trash to condense it, it ended up crushing them and they both died as a result. To make matters worse, and I'm pretty sure you could have seen this coming, the families of these two men were not compensated at all. Basically, that kind of shows you that working conditions were really poor and nobody cared about the employees. So the death of these two men sparked real anger within the community and especially the sanitation workers, and this resulted in a strike. So just a few weeks later, the Memphis sanitation strike was organized, and 1,300 black men who worked in the Department of Public Work went on strike for 2 months. These men marched every day for 2 months and they wore signs that said, "I am a man," which I think is really powerful and heartbreaking because they were just so desperate for people to see that they didn't deserve to be working in these types of conditions and that this was just a violation of basic human rights. So during the 2 months of strike and protesting, these men were beaten and discriminated against. And of course, this caused detrimental economic suffering for these men. These men were already given such low wages, so the fact that they were already living in poverty and they had to go on strike just to be seen for 2 months caused serious economic disaster for their families. And I hope that just shows you guys how desperate these men were for change and just how selfless they had to be to seriously put themselves on the line and their families on the line because they were so desperate for change for themselves and the future. So this strike did get the attention of Martin Luther King, and with his help, the workers were able to become unionized, which was a huge victory for them. It just shows you that protests do work, but it is devastating that these men had to do what they did just to get the attention and just to get basic human rights. So because of events like the Memphis sanitation strike and other environmental injustices that were happening all over the country, the idea of environmental justice grew stronger and stronger. People were just growing more desperate for change and more desperate for environmental justice. So in October of 1991, the National People of Color Environmental Leadership Summit was gathered for the first time, and several hundred people of color showed up. And at this summit, the 17 Principles of Environmental Justice was written. And the 17 Principles of Environmental Justice serves as a physical documentation of what the movement wants to protect and what it demands, and also what the movement opposes. I will leave a link where you can read the 17 Principles of Environmental Justice down below. Down below, I will also share a link that spotlights Black environmental activists, so definitely check out that link because it is really important to show their support and read their books and their documents and their research. So now I'm going to give you guys some examples of what goes on in our country because of environmental racism. I'm sure we have all heard of Flint, Michigan. That is a result of environmental racism. The people that live in Flint, Michigan still do not have clean water. But Flint is not the only area in America that suffers from environmental racism. There's an area in Louisiana that has been given the nickname Cancer Alley because the people that are living in that area are 800 times more likely to get cancer because of how polluted the area is. In one of the videos that I was watching about Cancer Alley, the man that was being interviewed that lives in the community was saying that you either have cancer, someone in your house has cancer, or your neighbor has cancer. Everybody has it, everybody's been affected by it, and it's because of these living conditions. Also in these areas, not only is the air so polluted, it is also really loud. The residents say that there is a constant humming from the large machines, and it also smells really horrible. The pollution will seep inside of these people's homes and they will report it smelling like poison and plastic and just rotten, which is horrible. That is no way to be living. Another area in the US that has really bad pollution is Chicago. And Chicago was actually in the news recently because Illinois approved to have the metal shredding company General Iron Industries moved from a affluent white community and to allow them to relocate to the south side of Chicago in an area that is low income and the majority of the community is Latino. The south side of Chicago already has a tremendous amount of air pollution, and moving this company to that area is going to cause even more pollution. And not only is that concerning because the health concerns because of pollution is already horrible, but COVID is not over, and COVID disproportionately affects those types of communities because of air pollution, because the pollution in the air is so high, and that causes this particular group of people to be more susceptible to contracting the virus. This metal shredding company is also going to relocate right by schools and parks in the south side area, which is especially concerning for the population. On the screen, I'm going to put up 2 maps of Chicago, and the maps are really concerning to look at. If you took away the information from the maps and you overlap them, honestly, they would reflect the same information, but the map in red highlights childhood asthma, and it shows you which areas of Chicago has the most childhood asthma. And as you can see, southern side of Chicago has a lot of childhood asthma. And if you look at the map in blue, that shows you the percentage of African Americans living in Chicago. The maps are very similar. The high concentration of childhood asthma is in those Black communities, and that is heartbreaking. And these maps are physical proof that the air pollution in these communities is killing the residents, is causing so much health conditions. Asthma is just one of the many health conditions that this group of people suffers from. Another area that is severely affected by environmental racism is right in the state of North Carolina. Eastern North Carolina is home to a lot of hog farming, and hog farming is so horrible for the environment. Unfortunately, the majority of African Americans and Native populations that live in North Carolina reside in Eastern North Carolina, right by the hog farms. As a result of living by these hog farms, these communities suffer from a lot of health issues. Asthma is very prevalent in these communities. Infant death, which is absolutely horrific, is prevalent within these communities, along with anemia and blood poisoning. These Black and Native communities live by what is called lagoons, and they are just pits of feces from the hogs and blood and toxins, and these lagoons are obviously contaminating the air quality and the ground quality as well, because it seeps into the soil. The lagoon liquid is sprayed onto the fields, and it causes a lot of health issues in these communities, both physically and mentally. The areas around the farm have very low property value, which is really sad when you think about how schools are funded by property tax, and that's a whole other video. Definitely going to be getting into that in the future. But along with knowing that information, hog farms are only allowed to have a 500 feet distance away from schools. That is so close. And unfortunately, because we have a Republican senator, Tom Tillis, he does accept money from pork lobbying groups, and that just shows you that nothing is going to be done about this. Pork lobbying groups obviously don't want anything to be done. They don't want to have to relocate. They want to be able to continue doing this industry because it is profitable to them. So they do put money into Tom Tillis's pocket so that nothing can be done. I do want to touch on indigenous communities. I feel as though indigenous injustice can be a whole other video in itself, and that is definitely something I would want to explore in the future. But just like any other person of color community, indigenous communities are also affected by environmental racism, but because of their spirituality, it is even more heartbreaking because indigenous communities view their culture and their identities as being one with the land, and they feel very spiritually attached to their land. Having their community be so destroyed by environmental racism is extremely harmful to their communities, their culture, and their identities. It is not only killing them physically, but also killing them spiritually. So like other marginalized groups, they also suffer from poor air air quality, poor water quality, low property value, and other poor living conditions. The main difference is that they feel a spiritual connection to the land, which is very heartbreaking when you think about how their land is being so destroyed. And because of the whitewashing of history and dismissal of tribal nationhood, there is not adequate acknowledgement of indigenous people when it comes to talk of environmental injustice, because environmental justice policy and law talk mainly about the physical effects of environmental racism, and it does not really acknowledge the spiritual connection that indigenous people have to their land. But there has been a victory for environmental injustice to the indigenous people. The Dakota Access Pipeline, which is an oil route that goes from North Dakota to Illinois, has sparked a lot of protests and legal battles because of all of the environmental injustice that this pipeline causes. And because of all the protests and legal battles, the pipeline is said to be reviewed for shutdown and have its oil emptied by August 5th, which will be amazing for the community and environmental justice moving forward. So let's talk about why all of this happens. Obviously, policies and poor regulations have a lot to do with it. Because these communities are so looked over and they contain marginalized populations, there are not good regulations to keep these communities safe, and the cycle just keeps continuing. Obviously, racism plays a huge role in it. The government does not care about marginalized communities the way that they care about white communities and privileged communities and more wealthy communities. So obviously they are going to put a power plant in a black community before they put a power plant in a white community. Lobbying is a huge reason why environmental racism continues to happen. These large, rich, powerful companies will pay politicians to not pass laws, not acknowledge environmental racism, and not do anything to fix the issue. And obviously people who can afford to leave these situations will do so, leaving behind the people who cannot afford to do so, which are people who live in poverty with low income jobs. So what do we do about it? What happens next? What is our government going to do to protect these people and move forward? Like I said earlier, we cannot talk about the environment without talking about racism, and the way that we treat our environment is killing our earth, and if we don't do something about it soon, we do not have that much longer on this planet. But our government does have a plan called the Green New Deal. The Green New Deal is one of the most progressive legislative proposals that comes from the federal level, and it is a 10-year plan to move to 100% clean and renewable energy by 2030. The Green New Deal also promises a living wage to anybody who needs it, which is a revolution for workers and frontline communities. The Green New Deal is 14 pages long, and it talks about how to combat climate change along with providing people with jobs, and not only providing them with jobs but also protecting those workers. Right now, the working conditions for the resources and energy that we currently use, like coal and oil, those jobs are very unsafe, causing poor living conditions and also result in health concerns. I'm going to also leave some interesting videos about the Green New Deal, some that are very entertaining to watch because they have AOC in them. In my opinion, she's very enjoyable to listen to, so she will make this very heavy and confusing and serious information digestible and easy to understand. Back in March, our Republican-controlled Senate did dismiss the Green New Deal, which is unfortunate, but I don't think it's going anywhere. It is a very powerful proposal that brings a lot of change to our country, and something like this is completely necessary if we do want to continue living on this earth. The Green New Deal also offers hope to indigenous communities. Like I said earlier, the indigenous people are often forgotten and not acknowledged when talking about environmental injustice in a way that is fitting for their lifestyle because they are so spiritually connected to the land. The bill promises to obtain free, prior, and informed consent for, quote, all decisions that affect indigenous peoples and their traditional territories, honoring all treaties and agreements within indigenous peoples, and protecting and enforcing the sovereignty and land rights for indigenous peoples. This is just the start to combat injustices towards the Native communities in the US. I want to leave you guys with a very powerful and thought-provoking quote. If you're not at the table, you're on the menu. That quote serves as a reminder that environmental racism is heavily influenced by the fact that our government is dominated by white males. Marginalized communities cannot continue having their future be in the hands of white politicians, white male politicians. Regulations and change for these communities are quick to be pushed under the rug when there's nobody to oppose them, especially because white politicians are never really affected by environmental racism. We desperately need a more diverse government to show a better representation of all of our communities that are living in the US. So that does wrap up today's video on environmental racism. I highly encourage you guys to watch the videos I have linked down below. All the videos that I'm going to link down below are quick videos, so they are easy to watch, so you really don't have an excuse to not do so. They won't take up that much of your time. I also encourage you to read the articles I have listed down below and also look into the Black activists that I talked about in the beginning. I do not believe I have the capability of shedding light on just how horrific the living conditions are in these marginalized communities affected by environmental racism. So it is really important to make an effort to listen to people that are sharing their stories on environmental racism by watching videos and interviews and documentaries and reading their stories. It's important to remember that environmental racism not only contributes to poor living conditions, but it also contributes to many health concerns. Marginalized communities suffer from way more health concerns physically and mentally because of environmental racism, and unfortunately our healthcare system has a lot of ingrained racism within its institution, along with misogynistic values, and in next week's episode we will get into all of that. So definitely make sure you are subscribed, you have your notifications on, so you can get notified when I post next week's Makeup and Wake Up talking about the corruption within our healthcare system.